I got disconnected while I was saying. There's a lot of beautiful shell jewelry. Polished, dyed shell. It's beautiful and it's really inexpensive. Um, you know, the parts it makes jewelry with. What's that? I'm gonna try that part. Oh, there you go. I bought these pretty gray pearls, pearl earrings on Wish. Pretty pearl gray. But I had a hard time getting them on. I'll try one more time. Could you help me, though? Here we go. Awesome. And it's in its own home. That's cool. Thank you. Oh, excuse me.
differences, even those that did manage to do a fairly efficient vaccine deployment, what they did not see coming was not just the variants, but the fact that the variants would make younger people sicker. And that's a curveball that 2 weeks ago wasn't on the radar, or even a week ago. And that has changed the picture. It has been interesting to see that, for instance, in my province, the places that are now under tougher measures were places where there were more things that you could do, as opposed to Montreal, where most of the stuff that was shut down was never reopened again. I'm always wary of going after premiers for curveballs that no one saw coming. And I don't think that we should get into the debate over who gets vaccinated and who doesn't. But I will note that even as cases are rising in Quebec, where the first wave would be other places to start with older people, there are no new cases and no new waves of cases in long-term care homes. Right. So somewhere, somehow, we're in a race between vaccines and the variants. We're not necessarily winning that race, but we're not yet completely losing it.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
I was just going to say, there's so many moving parts, including, to take the vaccination, for example. I've been seeing pictures of, giant mass vaccination centers that are basically empty. Is that the fault of the organizers of them? No, it turns out that people are kind of skittish about going to these large centers, and they prefer going to places like pharmacies that are more human scale. That's something you probably, can't be sure of and can't predict until you try it.
I think it's fair to say that this third wave is different than the first two, right, for all the reasons that Chantal laid out there. But I do wonder around, and again, we talked about this, again, the communication around where things are at, and some of the things that Althea suggested there around the mixed messaging about what you're allowed to do, and why it applies to some and not others. Is that not something, maybe you can start on that, Andrew, is that not something that we should be better at this stage?
Well, it's easy to say yes. Again, I think if you think about some of the pressures they're under, where some people are saying you're doing too much, some people are saying you're doing too little. Now, obviously, it's your job as a government to find that right balance. But I think you see in some of the kind of performative things that they've been doing, that they're trying to show how tough they're being, even as they're perhaps not being tough enough in other areas. So I'm not aware of a great deal of cases that have come out of outdoor patios. And yet I think they probably felt if we're saying we're shutting down and we're leaving outdoor patios out, we're going to take stick from the media. So part of the messaging, I think, is and the confusion, the messaging is the pressures they're under, because, as I say, there are people shooting at them from both sides on this one.
Yeah, and maybe go ahead, Chantal.
And if I can add, I'm not totally sure, and I know that I'm taking a shot at ourselves, that
Well, let's see. I got one to upload that's kind of short.
prime minister's chair is to have to balance a whole lot of issues. It's easy enough to say we're going to send everybody home, and you know, if you're a medical expert, your best advice would probably be put everyone in a bubble, and everything will be fine, except we're all gonna go crazy.
Okay, let's move on to another topic. This week, the parliamentary budget officer said the economy is maybe doing better than expected. A predicted $363 billion deficit is looming, but he also had some warnings about the Liberal stimulus spending. All this just weeks ahead of the first federal budget in 2 years. Chantal, Andrea, and Althea all back for another round of that issue. I mean, there were interesting things in that report. I'll start with you, Andrew, on this, because it did show that some of this money that we're thrown out the window in huge quantities will stop, and we will start to pull our way out of deficit. I know you'll probably want to talk about that, but there will be some of that will happen. But there were some interesting warnings too about the amount of stimulus spending.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is the economy's come in a little stronger than maybe we might have expected, and the deficit's probably going to come in a little lower than it was projected a few months ago. That's good news in one sense. It's bad news in another way for the government, because I think they want to spend the stimulus money anyway. I think stimulus was just a label they wanted to put on it. And people have been telling them now from all kinds of corners, even if you think this fiscal stimulus would be effective, and we'll leave that argument to one side for now, it's not necessary. The economy is going to be pretty much back to full employment by the time they start to wheel it out. And the risk, of course, is you contribute to things that are also already stirring in the United States and elsewhere, of interest rates starting to rise. And remember, the whole argument that we can run these enormous deficits was interest rates are at historic lows and are going to stay there. Well, they're already about twice what the levels that they were projected to be in the November statement. So we've got to be very concerned about that. So yes, I think this is a warning that says the deficits are supposed to be temporary. They're supposed to be key to the immediate crisis. We do not want to get into long-term structural deficits of this kind, and the risk if they proceed with this stimulus is that exactly what you get.
So is it that they shouldn't use stimulus, Chantal, or is it that politically it might be wiser to do something smaller than what they're talking about? Although we all know that this is likely would be a pre-electoral budget too, so they're stuck with that as well.
Well, they're stuck, but we're not, in the sense that the good news about all this is we don't know what the balance will be in the budget, but what we do know is that it is more than likely that Canadians will have a chance to pronounce on it in an election before most of the stimulus money or whatever money is spent. So the government will have to make a case for its choices, and people will not have to wait 3 years to say this was the wrong choice or this was the right choice. I think bottom line, it's a rather healthy situation.
You know what just happened there? Chantal got really close to predicting an election. That's like Maria, like as close as Chantal is ever gonna get.
In 2021, I'm not a June election person.
Okay,
so we're clear.
Okay, that's fine. Althea, what did you make of the report and what that should tell us about what to expect?
Well, I think Chantal's right on the timing there. It is very clear that the Liberals wanted to go to run on the stimulus and to use the opportunity to ask people to buy into their plan for recovery. Like that might still be the case if the election is at the end of the summer or later in the fall. But I think that the third wave has caused unfortunate rethinking in Liberal circles, at least according to their own idea. The PBO report is really interesting. There are just a few things I'd like to say. We were already in a structural deficit before the pandemic hit, so I think the flag about that 70 to 100 billion, including program spending that might continue to run extra deficit, is something that is concerning. I wonder if Chrystia Freeland regrets putting those fiscal guardrails that were suggested to her back in the fall, because as Andrew so clearly pointed, judging by the economic numbers, the unemployment numbers, things are rosier, and basically the PBO is saying, I don't think there's a need for this. There likely may not be a need for this at all, certainly not to the amount that you're expecting. But I also think that the pressure looking down south and seeing what Joe Biden is doing, there will be a Build Back Better envious, and
Envy,
perhaps
yes,
they will
yes,
want
yes.
envy from what they're doing in the US and what the Liberals would like to do here. So whether or not it is needed, I think we are going to see at least a large chunk of that money.
Well,
Ooh,
that makes
$5
an
to
interesting
ship?
place for the Conservatives too, and we can throw in your
I don't
election
think I
costs
can
too,
afford that.
because then the Conservatives, can they not start to make the case about big spending Liberals, pulling us deeper and deeper into deficit, or is that not something Canadians are thinking about right now? Andrew and then Chantal clearly has something to say.
Can't pay $5 for a stone and $5
I
for
think
shipping.
they've got a fine line to walk. They would be remiss if they were not making a case for some degree of restraint, because the Liberals are certainly unrestrained, it seems to me, by any sense of the debt and that kind of thing. I think what the Tories need to work through is some version of what I might call small government activism. I use small in relative terms. But they've got to show that they have policies and ideas that are addressing what is clearly a public mood for a more active government that's more focused on really solving some of these problems. But they've got to show that they can do it in ways that are different from the Liberals and ideally are lower spending and lower taxing than the Liberals. So it's not just, no, don't do that. It's do this instead. And that's what I think they really need to work on.
Okay, last word to Chantal.
Well, if the election were 3 years from now, yes. But if you read the audience that Erin O'Toole is going to be speaking to, most likely in an election, which will most likely come a lot earlier than that, I agree with Andrew. They are going to have to walk a really fine line, because at this point the audience is not.
You build or turn my home design into a business. My product is Botox. My brand is
Cool.
eyesandbotoxmemphis.com. Make a difference each week. Start different at GoDaddy.com.
Thank you all very much, appreciate it.
I like citrine. That's pretty. That's pretty. I'm hoping if I buy a few items from this one shop, they'll combine shipping. That's interesting. Oh, excuse me. Look. God's encouraging me to spend money. I'm not sure what's going on. Yeah, they're combining shipping. I'm looking at a site called Duo. I'm not sure that's the complete name. it's Duo Duo Jewelry. And at Etsy, when you name your store, you're not allowed to have any spaces in between. So it's Duo Duo Jewelry. It's from China, out of China. God's telling me to search for malachite here. God made like Labradorite. Labradorite. Not Labrador, not like a dog. Labra. It's kind of pretty. It's, well, it could be a quartz, but it has the same coloring as, Powell. I had this beautiful, I don't know if it was a bird or what. It was like a porcelain decoration that I got from Penny's for about $15. It was so beautiful. And my son Rich, I had it about a week and he knocked it off the bookcase, broke it. Pretty. Crystal chest. That's awfully pretty. What is that? Gourd? Peridot? Huh. Fluorite. Precision copper. I like this one. It says Peridot, but it looks. What's going on? Oh crap. Ugh. looks like there are the one I like. I'm gonna take a little break. Eat my lunch. I like the Canadian news. I'll stop recording and upload this one.